I remember the candle smoke rising in the chapel of Compiègne, thin, spiraling, just like the breath of prayer and fear. I was 15 when Father crowned me co-king, but the truth was clear. He still ruled everything. I was a symbol, a second name on a coin, a polished statue beside the throne. He never said it aloud, but his silence was enough. I was not meant to rule. I was meant to continue. The court was quiet that winter. Constance hadn't arrived yet. Neither had Fate. Only Bertha of Blois, the Duke's daughter, moved like firelight through the stone halls. We were both young. We both knew our places, and we both ignored them when we walked in the gardens. "I saw how your father looked at you during Mass," she whispered once, as we passed the frozen fountain. "He watches you like a sword he's afraid might break." I stopped walking. "I think he's afraid I won't be sharp enough," I said. Bertha smiled, sad and bright. "Then let him be afraid. Let yourself be dangerous." That night, Father summoned me. His private chamber was dimly lit, the smell of wax and old leather heavy in the air. His robes were still on, stiff with gold thread. He didn't sit. He stood facing the window, as if France herself was outside, waiting. "You will take the crown from me one day," he said, "but never forget whose hand placed it there." I remained silent. He turned. His face was iron, his voice colder. "You are not to be loved, not to be clever, not to be moved. You are to be righteous." He stepped closer. I could smell incense on his breath. Or was it blood? "You will swear," he said. "Swear now. You will be a king worthy of God, not of the heart." I remember the taste of those words as I said them. They clung to my tongue like dust from a church floor. "I swear," I said. But a voice inside me whispered, "No, not yet." Later that week I saw Bertha in the chapel garden. Her hands were cold, hidden in her sleeves. "I heard your father made you swear something," she said. I nodded. "And will you keep it?" I didn't answer. Instead, I kissed her. It was clumsy, hungry, honest. And it was the first thing I did without my father's shadow standing over me. 2 weeks later, he fell ill. The chapel bells began ringing long before the priests said the words. The court hushed. The courtiers bowed. But I stood by his bed and saw for the first time that the man who ruled the world could not hold on to breath. He looked at me. "You'll be king now," he rasped. "Remember what you swore." He died before I could speak. And for a moment, the silence was a kingdom. The next day, they gathered to proclaim me. They said I was now king of the Franks. The archbishop poured oil on my forehead. The sword was laid at my feet. But none of it felt real until I saw Bertha again. She stood by the door, her hands trembling. "You're free now," she said. I nodded. And then she asked, almost afraid of her own voice, "Will you choose love or force?" That night, I sat alone in Father's chamber. His cloak still hung on the wall. His scent still lingered. I had been king since I was 15, crowned in Reims, anointed with oil beside him, but never alone, never truly ruling. I was a second son orbiting his fire, a symbol, a student. But now, he was gone. And the silence was no longer his. It was mine. I looked at the oath he made me swear, and I looked at a letter I had written, sealed, addressed to the Pope. A plea, a permission. One to bind me to God, the other to her. I held both. The candle burned low, and in the dark I heard his voice again. Not of the heart. I said nothing. But the next morning, only one letter was sent. A king's first decision should not be a love letter. But mine was. The morning after Father's burial, I left the palace chapel not for the war council, not for the treasury, but for Bertha. She was waiting in the cloister garden, wrapped in a black veil. Not for mourning, for danger. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I'm king now," I replied. "I can be anywhere I choose." She smiled, bitter and beautiful. "Then, choose me." The court moved quickly to bind my reign with alliance. "Marry a daughter of Provence," they said, "or Burgundy. Someone with land, dowries, influence, someone holy." But I had already chosen. I had chosen Bertha. Before the crown, before the oath, before God himself claimed to interfere. We were cousins. Distant, yes, but close enough for the Pope's ink to blot my name from the Book of Grace. I married her in secret. One dawn. One chapel. One vow, spoken by two trembling fools and a priest with more love than caution. At court they called her the Quiet Rebellion. The queen no one dared name. But the church wasted no time. The letter from Rome arrived like thunder wrapped in wax. "Robert, king of the Franks, is hereby ordered to separate from the woman Bertha of Blois, or face excommunication." The seal of St. Peter glared at me like a blade. We met in the candlelit scriptorium, hidden behind the abbey. She held the letter in her hands like a viper. "So this is your crown," she said. "A cage." I stepped toward her. "It's a symbol. It doesn't rule me." "It will," she said, "or it will destroy you." That night, I didn't sleep. The archbishop paced my chambers, quoting councils, laws, hellfire. "This marriage puts not just your soul at risk, but France itself. You will be a king without mass, without clergy, without sanctity." I said nothing, because I had known it would come to this. The crown wanted obedience. My heart wanted Bertha. They gathered the court in silence. Priests lined the chapel walls. The letter of annulment sat on the altar like a corpse waiting to be buried. Bertha stood beside me. Her eyes held neither tears nor pleading. Only one question. "Choose me," she whispered, "even if you lose the crown." I took her hand, and for one wild second, I almost said yes, but I didn't. I signed. My hand shook, but I signed. They led her out through the side passage, wrapped in veils. No cries, no final words, only a glance, as if she were already fading into myth. The next night, I sat at my desk alone. Another letter awaited. A papal blessing for a future match with a Provençal princess. The path to forgiveness. The corrective union. A roadmap back to grace. I held it over the candle. Watched the edge blacken. Curl. Disappear. Ashes drifted to the stone floor like snowfall. Outside, the priest chanted in the nave. My courtiers toasted the wisdom of my decision. But in my chamber, I opened a blank parchment and wrote the only words I dared not say aloud. I have signed the cross, but I carry her name. They called her Constance of Arles. Her voice was music, her stare, a blade. She walked like a crowned lioness, and I was told, "She will make France respect you." What they didn't say was that she would make me fear myself. The marriage was held in Bourges. A grand procession. Bells. Wine. The church smiled again. The barons drank deeply. The people cheered a queen they'd never know. I kissed her hand before the altar. She didn't kiss back, only smiled. Slight. Measuring. She brought jewels. Land. A retinue of southern knights who spoke in soft, coiled syllables and never removed their gloves indoors. She also brought storms. 1 week after our union, she ordered the kitchen servants flogged for spoiling a pheasant. A week after that, she slapped a bishop across the face during council. "He interrupted me," she said. "At night, we shared a bed, but not a silence." She would ask questions in the dark, probing me like a surgeon. "Do you dream of her? Do you love France? or just your father's shadow? Am I your queen, or your penance? I never answered, because I was afraid of my own truth. One night, in midwinter, a monk arrived bearing a letter with no seal. It was a single sentence. She prays at the convent of Saint-Aignan. Bertha. I left the court at dawn. No banners, no guards, only a cloak, a hood, and guilt heavy as mail. The convent sat on the hill above Blois, veiled in frost. The sisters sang softly behind the gate. I waited until they passed. Then I saw her, behind the iron bars of the side cloister, a figure in gray. Bertha. She turned. Time had not ruined her. It had refined her. Her face was thinner, her hair hidden, but her eyes were still the only truth I'd ever trusted. I said nothing, nor did she. I simply stepped forward, placed my hand on the bars. She mirrored me, fingers to fingers, bone to bone, soul to soul. It was not a scene for poets. There were no tears, no protests, no pleas. Only the quiet knowledge. We had chosen different prisons. Then I heard the bell. It was time to leave. She didn't move, nor did I. Only one word passed between us. "Forgive?" I whispered. She tilted her head, almost smiled, and whispered back, "Forget." I returned to court, to banners, applause, and silence at my side. Constance noticed everything. She said nothing for 2 days. Then, as I poured wine at supper, she leaned close, her voice a breath against my ear. "You smell of pine." I froze. Her smile widened. "And guilt." Later that night, as the torches were being doused, I heard whispers in the servants' hall. A man knelt at the queen's feet, head bowed, trembling. I followed him, he said. He was in Blois, he whispered, in hers. Constance did not speak, but her hand closed around the stem of her goblet and crushed it. Constance bore me children like oaths carved in stone. Hugh, the eldest, came first. Then Henri. Then little Robert. All boys, all eyes. But only one inherited his mother's fire and my silence. From infancy, Hugh had questions sharper than blades. Why don't you command the dukes? Why does the church whisper behind your back? Why do people say the queen was once someone else? I gave him lessons, tactics, scripture. Constance gave him knives. She taught him not just how to read, but how to read people. Your father, she once told him before a hunt, thinks too much. A king must not think. He must strike. I overheard. I said nothing. But that night I asked her, why do you fill him with anger? She didn't blink. You refused to give your heart to marriage, she said. I will give my children the sword. It began with small defiance. Hugh questioned the court treasurer in public, mocked my chaplain during vespers, left the palace to speak with lords I had not summoned. Then one morning he stood in full armor at the gates of Orléans, with a retinue of knights wearing no royal sigil, a declaration without parchment, a rebellion without war. The court trembled. Some whispered, he claims the throne. Others said, he challenges his father's weakness. I said nothing. I rode out alone to meet him. We met beneath an ash tree, far from walls, watched only by crows. He did not kneel. Why? I asked. He looked past me, toward the horizon. Because I cannot become king by waiting to inherit a shadow. His voice was not cruel, not angry, just tired. I dismounted, stepped close. You are my son, I said, and you are my obstacle, he replied. There was a silence that might have birthed blood. But I reached for my belt, unfastened my sword, and placed it between us on the grass. If you must become king by taking, then take it. Hugh stared at the blade, then at me. Then, slowly, he dropped to one knee. I forgive you, I said, and meant it. But in the tree line, beyond the circle of dust and pride, Bertha watched. Her veil drawn low, she heard every word, and though her lips moved in prayer, her eyes did not close. That night, a raven perched on the convent's gate. A sister opened the door. Bertha stood alone in the hallway, her hand pressed to her chest. "The king forgives his son," she whispered. "But who forgives the king?" So today we dive into the reign of Robert II, a devout king torn between faith, love, and the survival of his fragile dynasty. But before we go on, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic stories of love, power, and real history. After that, tell me in the comments, why do you think Robert's own children turned against their father? Alright, let's move on. At first it came as a rumor, no louder than the rustle of cloaks in an antechamber, a murmur that one could almost pretend not to hear. Then it arrived as parchment sealed with Rome's cold certainty, and after that there was only a silence so heavy it seemed to press upon the ribs like a weight. A silence not of rest, but of abandonment. When I attempted, not to free Bertha, not even to restore her to my side, but merely to ease her confinement and allow a gentler cloister to receive her, an act born of mercy more than defiance, the bishops turned as though I had spat upon the altar itself. Their anger was not fiery, it was precise and glacial, the kind that smiles while it cuts. One by one they wrote to the Holy See, filling their letters with anxious piety and carefully measured poison, and Rome answered. The sentence was excommunication. Not in whispers now, but in iron. My name struck from the Mass. My soul declared unfit to receive the sacrament. My kingship, suddenly, without God. Monks who had once served me hurriedly crossed themselves and slipped away from royal chapels as though I carried a contagion. Abbots closed their gates to my emissaries. Priests who blessed beggars would not bless bread that had crossed my table. I heard of a child, too weak to live, whose burial was refused because his father wore my livery. "This is a cursed kingdom," the priest had said, and no one contradicted him. When I rode through Paris, the people no longer bowed. Some stared with a strange, hungry silence. Others made the sign of the cross as though warding off plague. A boy threw a dead rat at my carriage. His mother did not chastise him. She only whispered a prayer, as if for protection from me. Inside the palace, the hush was different. Not hostile, but expectant, like servants waiting to see whether the house will burn or merely collapse. And Constance? She watched it all as though she had been waiting for this moment since the day we wed. "You see now," she said once, her voice low and almost tender, "what comes of choosing love over dominion? God does not share what he considers his." There was no triumph in her tone, only inevitability. I wrote to Rome. No reply. I sent gifts. They were returned, still wrapped. I prayed. The heavens did not answer. Prayer is never more terrible than when it echoes back as emptiness. One night, long after the torches had guttered and the halls fell still, I entered the cathedral alone. No procession, no incense, no chanting. Only the dim outline of the nave stretching forward into darkness. The great pillars loomed like silent witnesses, and the air was thick with the scent of cold stone and extinguished wax. I walked down the central aisle slowly, feeling the echo of each step as though the building itself were listening. Before the altar I knelt, not as a king but as a man from whom something invisible had been torn away. I did not beg. There were no words to bargain with. I simply knelt before a God who no longer claimed me. And in that hollow stillness I understood. It was not only God who had turned his face. It was I who no longer knew how to seek him. When I rose again, she was already there. Constance stood at the entrance to the chancel, framed by moonlight that spilled through the doorway and gilded the edges of her veil. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes gleamed with something between victory and revelation. "Do you know why heaven has left you?" she asked quietly. I did not answer. She came closer, her steps slow, deliberate, ceremonial, like a priestess approaching an altar. When she reached me, she lifted a hand and brushed my cheek with her fingers, not in comfort, but in possession. "Heaven deserted you," she whispered, "because you deserted strength, you deserted duty, you deserted me." Her forehead touched mine. I felt her breath. "If God has turned away," her voice softened, "then I will be your God." Outside, the bells began to ring for evening prayer. But no prayer would rise for me. Within those shadowed walls, there was no congregation, no light, no absolution, Only a king on his knees, unseen, unforgiven, and utterly alone. Holiness, I learned, has a texture. It is not soft. It is not radiant. It does not warm the soul like sunlight through stained glass. It is rough, cold. It scrapes the skin of pride until nothing remains but raw obedience. When the bowl of excommunication reached its full fury, my council begged me to repent, not for Bertha, not even for God, but for France. Without the church, I was not a king. I was a threat, an anomaly, a stain upon the land. And so I answered Rome not with fire, but with ash. I stripped the court of laughter. I dismissed all music from the halls. I walked barefoot through the streets of Orléans during Lent, clad only in a plain woolen tunic, with a rope cinched around my waist and penitential thorns beneath the fabric. Children watched from windows. Nobles stared unspeaking. Some priests still refused to bless me, even as I knelt at their feet. They demanded humility. I gave them humiliation. The monks composed hymns for my contrition. The bishops sent envoys to Rome. He is broken, let him return. But even as the gates of heaven creaked open, I could think only of the gate I had never dared return through, the convent in Blois. It rained the night I came to her. Not a cleansing rain, but a cold, heavy downpour that blurred the road, soaked my cloak, and flattened the fields in a hush that felt funereal. I left my horse near the orchard wall and climbed the path alone, boots sinking into the mud. The nuns had gone to vespers. Only one candle burned in the side chapel. She stood within. Bertha. Not veiled, not cloaked, just herself. Her hands folded, her eyes dry, her face unreadable. She did not speak when I entered. She did not flinch. And I, already half drowned by grief and rain, stood there as if I had never seen her before. She broke the silence. "You came dressed as a ghost," she said softly. "No," I answered. "I came as what's left of a man." We did not speak of the past. We did not rehearse pain. There were no accusations, no prayers, no royal titles. Only two bodies, still tethered by something neither the Pope nor the Queen could annul. She led me to the back cell, and we lay down, not in sin, but in memory. Her skin was cold from stone, mine, fevered from guilt, and yet somehow they met in the middle, in warmth. There was no fire, no light, only breath, only the sound of rain tapping on the window like the softest of condemnations. Afterward she lay with her back to me, fingers pressed against the wall. "I forgive you," she said. My throat clenched. "But I will never bless what you became." I wanted to stay, to say nothing, to listen to her breathing as if it were the last sound in the world I could still trust. But she turned, looked me full in the face, and whispered, "I was your heart, but you chose your crown." A pause. "Don't come back." When I left the chapel, dawn was breaking behind the clouds. The convent bell rang for morning mass. I walked back through the orchard alone, soaked, shaking, and aware that I had been granted a miracle, but only once. The next time I would return, it would be as a stranger to her memory. The kingdom rotted quietly at first. A bad harvest. A caravan ambushed on a forest road. A baron's refusal to pay taxes. A whisper of heresy among the monks. All manageable. All familiar. Until the plague came. Then, rot found its voice. It began in the western villages. Blackened fingers, swollen tongues, whole families buried by dusk. The priests called it divine punishment. The peasants called it witchcraft. The nobles called for walls. And I, the king, called for prayers that no longer rose. Then came war, not from abroad, but within. Hungry peasants seized grain stores. Mercenaries turned on their own lords. Abbeys were pillaged by the very soldiers they once fed. France cracked not from outside pressure, but from its own bones breaking under the weight of fear. I rode through towns where the streets were silent, not because they were empty, but because no one dared speak above the coughing. Bodies were burned in pits beside chapels. The crosses were black with smoke. The bells rang too often to be noticed. In one village, a man fell to his knees before me and begged not for food, but for meaning. "Is this what your crown buys us?" he cried. I had no answer. Even my gold felt unclean. Then came the battlefield. Not a war, truly. Just a chaotic knot of desperate men fighting over fields that could no longer feed them. There, amidst blood and ash, I saw a boy, no older than 16, cradling the body of another youth, pale and still, lips blue from cold or death, or both. The boy rocked him gently, whispering something only grief understands. And in that moment, I saw myself again, under the rain in Blois. I saw Bertha's shoulder as she turned away. I saw what I had traded for this crown of ash. When I returned to Orléans, the air inside the palace was no cleaner than the fields. My courtiers wrapped themselves in silk, while the peasants wrapped their dead in blankets. And Constance, still unbent, still furious, stood at the center of the great hall as if carved from judgment. Our son, she said coldly, has not been named heir. I turned away. There are greater battles. No, she cut me off. There is only one that matters now. If not my son. She stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. There will be blood. That night, I sat in the dark, holding a coin marked with my face. The silver was tarnished. So was the man, and as the wind howled through the broken window panes of a crumbling palace, I began to wonder if France still remembered my name at all. By the time the fires died down and the fields turned black, the only thing left untouched in the kingdom was ambition. Not love, not faith, ambition. And it had found new hosts, my sons. Constance had grown quiet, but never idle. I could feel her behind every noble's whisper, every priest's hesitation when pronouncing blessings over me. She wanted Henri on the throne. Not Hugh, who had shown mercy. Not Robert, who still clung to hope. Henri, our third, the clever one, the one with the smile that never reached his eyes. I began to hear reports that he drank with mercenaries, that he paid scribes to redraw borders that were not his, that he spoke in private of, quote, a kingdom not ruled, but taken. I refused to believe it. At first, until the day he came to my chapel. It was late. A storm rattled the stained glass like fists on heaven's gates. Henri stood before the altar alone, in armor, his hair slicked with rain, his sword unsheathed. And there, casually, almost with a smile, he stepped on the crucifix that lay at the foot of the sanctuary. I gasped, though no one else was there. He looked up and spoke without turning. I will become stronger than you, Father. Then added, without malice, because I do not fear God. That night I sat in the tower room with the will before me. It had taken months to draft. Names, titles, borders, all carved in ink like bones beneath skin. Hugh was the safe choice. Henri, the dangerous one. Robert, the forgotten one. I read their names as if reading obituaries. Then I heard it, a voice. Faint, but mine. Or was it hers? Bertha. I did not sleep. I sat by the fire, staring at the seal in my hand, the wax already soft from my grip. And then I dreamed, or remembered, or both. She stood at the edge of my chamber, veiled in white, face aglow not with life but with the calm that only absence brings. She did not speak, but her presence filled the air with the weight of every if I had never dared voice. I rose before dawn, took the will, lit a single candle, watched the flames curl the parchment. The ink hissed as it burned, as if angry at being denied its future. I mounted a horse, alone. No retinue, no heralds, no crown, only a man returning to the last place he had left something behind. As the road twisted toward the monastery of Saint-Aignan, I saw the roof in the distance. The trees whispered with wind. The sky turned violet with morning, and somewhere beyond those walls, or beneath them, or above them, I felt her, waiting, or gone. The monastery at Saint-Aignan was quieter than memory. No bells, no chants, only the wind, threading its fingers through the bare trees, whistling low over the cloister stones as though it, too, remembered her voice. I arrived at dusk, unannounced. The brothers took me in with blank stares, offering bread and water and no questions. Perhaps they already knew that kings came here not to rule, but to ask for forgiveness they could never truly receive. Her cell was empty, her bed untouched, her prayer stool faded by the sun, her name gone from the register. She had not been here in years, just a shadow now, in corridors where she once knelt. But the silence still carried her shape. I stayed 3 days. I did not wear the crown. I did not write decrees. I walked barefoot in the gardens, listened to the cold bird song at dawn, and tried, truly tried, to believe that I could still be something other than a ruin in royal robes. On the 2nd day, I confessed. The priest was younger than me, but his eyes were ancient. He asked me nothing, he only listened. When I finished, he crossed himself slowly. I looked at him and spoke, voice hoarse as gravel. My sin was not that I loved. A pause. It was that I did not protect love when it needed a sword. The priest did not absolve me. He only nodded. Sometimes that is more honest than forgiveness. On the 3rd morning, a rider arrived. His boots were muddy, his face pale. He did not dismount fully before placing the letter into my hand. No seal, only a smear of wax and a name. I opened it beneath the monastery's barren fig tree. The message was short. 9 words. Bertha of Blois has died. May God receive her. The world did not end, but it stilled, as though even the birds paused their wings. I sank to my knees in the gravel path, the parchment crumpling in my hand. Not with wailing, not with drama, just a long, soundless ache, as if my ribs had collapsed inward, and I realized there was no one left to forgive me. That evening, by candlelight, I returned to my chamber. I sat at the table and began to write a new will, but not of lands, not of castles, a testament perhaps, not to my sons, but to the silence I had sown. The fire had gone out in the hearth, though no one dared say so aloud. In the palace at Melun, I lay beneath heavy furs that did not warm me, attended by doctors, monks, and sons who spoke in whispers near the threshold but never crossed it. I could feel my body ending in pieces, first the strength in my hands, then the fire in my chest, then even the taste of water, which now felt like ash. The room smelled of lavender and decay, of fresh rushes strewn across the floor, of prayers repeated without conviction, of waiting, always waiting. They tried to comfort me with relics. A splinter of the true cross, a cup from Jerusalem, a cloth said to have touched Saint Denis. But none of these holy things could stop the truth from settling in the bones. That I had ruled a kingdom, but not my heart, and that my crown, so long carried like a torch through shadow, had burned all that made me human. My sons came and went. Hugh bowed his head but did not meet my eyes. Henri lingered by the door, silent and unreadable. Young Robert brought a candle and asked nothing. None of them were what I hoped. None of them knew who I had once been. They only saw the man the church had shamed, the queen had scolded, the people had half forgotten. On the 3rd night I asked for ink and parchment. My hands trembled, but the words came easily, too easily, like something that had waited years behind the teeth. Bertha, if you see this, then I am dead. Or they sent it too late, as always. I want you to know I loved you, even when I had no right. Even when God turned his face and men turned their backs, I loved you in silence, in sin, in shadows. And if you are already gone, if your eyes no longer open in this world, then I pray that love follows you into whatever light you've found. You were my heart, even when I gave it away. Robert I sealed the letter with no emblem, no crown, only wax and warmth. The monk took it wordlessly, and I closed my eyes. There is a moment in dying when breath no longer matters, only memory, and I remembered. Her voice, the bars between us, the scent of rain on her cloak, the way she had once said, "Don't come back," and how I had returned anyway. Too late. The candle flickered low, my chest rose, fell, and then the door creaked open. Light poured in, not the torchlight of servants or the gloom of priests, but a gentler glow. I turned my head, slow, heavy, final. A figure stood in the doorway, veiled, still, watching. I could not see the face. Was it Constance come at last with judgment? Or Bertha come at last with peace? Or someone else entirely? I smiled. A boy's smile, perhaps, hidden in a dying king's mouth. And I whispered, I am going home. Thank you for listening. So, what about you? Do you choose with your heart or with duty? Drop your thoughts below, and while you're here, check out more stories from the Dynasty.